guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing, if I had to declutter one palette from each brand in my collection, which one would it be? And this is going to be a hard video because I just did declutters in my collection, but I had to go through and pick a whole nother palette that if I had to declutter one in my collection, this is the one it would be. And I hope that sounds like something that you're interested in. I cannot wait to discuss the palettes that I would declutter if I had to declutter one palette from my collection of each brand. Hopefully that sounds like something you're interested in. If it does, please keep on watching. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care. I'm also a field leader for Ulta Beauty. I get a lot of education in my position. I like to bring you that education here, but ultimately, I'm just out here talking about makeup because I love to talk about makeup. And I'm certain if you're here, you probably also like to talk about makeup. But if you find that my channel brings solace to your soul, subscribe. Subscribe before you go. I'd love to have you along. Don't forget to hit a girl up down in the comment section. Let me know you're new here. I would love to welcome you personally. And we're trying to hit 2,000 subscribers before my birthday in September. We're a short bit away from that, and I know that we can do it. And with that said, let's jump into this where we're talking about palettes, which is my favorite makeup to talk about. All right, so to preface this, I did this video last in March of 2022, so it's been 2 whole years and I have not looked at that video because I did not want to be swayed in my decisions. I do think that there's probably some loopovers from that video, but there's also quite a few brands in here that I didn't have in 2022 and some that I did have more palettes from in 2022 that I no longer do because I just did a declutter. I've done a couple declutters since then. And that said, this video was actually kind of hard to put together this time because I just did a declutter. So all of the palettes from these brands that I wanted to get rid of, I just got rid of. So there's that. With that also said, I do these knowing that I have several brands in my collection that I only have one palette from or 2 palettes from. So I baseline this on the brands that I have used and continue to own at least 3 palettes from. So there has to be at least 3 palettes from each one of these brands in my collection for me to determine which one I would declutter if I had to declutter one. And there will be a if I could only keep one coming very, very soon because the last time I did that one was in April of 2023. And I feel like it's the perfect yin to this yang, right? So let's jump in. Let's get started. Let's talk about this guy here. This would be the palette that I would declutter from Tarte. So here's why. This is all shimmer. This is an all shimmer palette except for this one shade here, which is the matte. And it isn't a matte that goes with every single shade in this palette. And I just know that myself, I use a palette more if it has a good determination of ratio between shimmers and mattes. And this only has one matte. And with that also said, this highlighter here in the center is just not great. Also, the packaging makes it super hard to store. I mean, I store my palettes kind of like books in a shelf, and this one just kind of likes to roll around everywhere. So I have to sit it just so, or it will roll to the back of my collection, and that is not how I like it to be. So this would be the palette that I would declutter from Tarte. This is the Tarte Make Believe in Yourself palette, and this came out way, way, way long ago in some like far, far away land with unicorns and rainbows. The next one I have is the Viseart palette that I would declutter, and this is the Viseart Sultry Muse palette. And the reason why I would declutter this one is you know, pretty similar to the Tarte Make Believe in Yourself palette. This is an all shimmer palette, and they're not even great shimmers. Their shimmers are more like satins, and like, while I love a good satin, I don't even think that these are great satins, to be honest. They're super firmly pressed in here, And this is their older formula, I have heard, and do have newer formulations of Viseart satins that I prefer. So this would be the palette that I would declutter from Viseart, and it is the Sultry Muse palette. This is the palette that I would declutter from Pat McGrath. Now, I have talked about these palettes before, and there are so many people that are in awe of these palettes because they don't even remember that Pat McGrath ever launched these, but these were her first rendition of a 5-pan palette. This one is the Eye Ecstasy Subversive mini eyeshadow palette from Pat McGrath. So this has 5 of the shimmer shades that you can find in her larger Subversive palette way back in the day. This was what I could afford from Pat McGrath. These were $25, and at least I got a little bit of a taste of her palettes. But again, this is a shimmer formula palette only. 5 shades, shimmers only, and they're not even shimmers that I wear very often. Now, I did pick up 2 of these. The other one is like Sublime or something like that, and it is more neutral eyeshadows. Still all of the shimmer formulation, but much easier to wear like all over the lid. I don't love this palette. It's not one that I pull for all the time, and it is also, I mean, just really super old. I do really like this red shade. It is really stunning. I also really like this shade, but the blue, the purple, the yellow, they're not my favorite. So that is the Pat McGrath Labs palette that I would get rid of. Now, I also take my, ABH palettes and put them into one category, and my ABH X Norvina palettes and put them into another category, because the Norvina collection is so expansive that I don't really, and it's such a different formulation, so I don't really put it into the ABH category. So you're going to see one in here for ABH, but this is the one that I have for ABH Norvina, and this is the Mini Pro Pigment Palette Volume 3. And for this one, for me, it's about the color story. Like, I just don't love this color story. I do love me a blue eyeshadow. And this one is really pretty, but this one is straight up glitter. This one is pretty, but then these mattes, I really just don't feel like they go together very well in a cohesive color story. So this isn't a 9-pan palette that I can take out as a one and done eyeshadow palette with me, because it just doesn't go together very well. Now, I was drawn in by this beautiful packaging, but I just don't think that this is a great palette because the cohesion of it is just not there. So for the ABH X Norvina collection eyeshadow palettes that I have, this one would be the one that I would declutter. And then for Violet Voss, this one pains me actually. I only have now in my collection 3 Violet Voss palettes. I've decluttered all the rest. This one is the Holy Grail palette, and I think I would get rid of this one just because it is just so meh in terms of color story. Like, it is beautiful, don't get me wrong. It is a beautiful eyeshadow palette, but I do think that I have these colors over and over and over again in my collection. And even though I love the Violet Voss formula, I also have these colors, or the ones that I really love out of this, or similar to that, in my Violet Voss Like a Boss palette. So I would hold on to that one and get rid of this one. Natasha Denona was hard for me. Listen, there are several palettes that I could get rid of from Natasha Denona and be perfectly fine with getting rid of them. But when it comes down to it, I'm a collector of Natasha Denona. So I had one on my list, 2 that I thought about immediately, and that was the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. But then when I was looking at it, I was like, there are some really beautiful standout shadows in here, and even though I don't like the palette as a whole, as a singular palette in my collection, I do love it for the complement of mixing and matching other shadows. And now that I say that, I may go change my mind on this, but I'm gonna go change my mind on this. That was quick. I do hold near and dear to me the prospect of being able to mix and match with her midi and her large size eyeshadow palettes, and really just kind of create from what I have in my collection the perfect Natasha Denona palette for myself. That said, the pastel one was the one that I had in my hot little hands a second ago. That one was like secondary, came to mind from the midi size point. But again, I just really like them for being able to mix and match the shadows. So when I think about one that doesn't really do me any kind of servicing in my palette collection from Natasha Denona, and one I just don't really pick up anymore because I have the larger midi size palette, or actually mega size palette of Natasha Denona's in this form, and I do think that this is the same one that I talked about a couple years ago. It would have to be the Natasha Denona Mini Sunset palette. This one is just a palette that doesn't do me any service being in my collection. I have the larger size of these palettes, and these shades don't pop out of these mini pans unless you know, do damage to the palette to get them out. So I'm not able to mix and match these pans, and I already have the larger size, and I'm certain that I now probably have a similar shade or this exact shade of every single one of these eyeshadows in this palette in my Natasha Denona palette collection, since I currently own something like 30 palettes from Natasha Denona. So this would have to be the palette that I would declutter from Natasha Denona. From Melt, it's about the size of the palette. And I know that that sounds stupid, but I really like cohesion. I'm a little bit OCD in case you didn't know. I really like cohesion in all the things that I have set forth, and I don't like having to store certain palettes from one brand in one section because they're this size, and then certain palettes from that same brand in another section because they're this size. And there's a couple of brands that I have like that, and I actually quite love this palette. But when I look at the collection that I have from this brand, this is the only one that stands out to me as one that I would get rid of, and it's just about the size of it. Like, I wish they had put these 8 pans into a palette like they did for Melt Smoke Sessions, because that would make this more consistent in my Melt collection as far as size or how the palette is shaped. Does that make any sense, or am I the only one that's crazy here? I mean, it's a lot like the Tarte Make Believe in Yourself palette, right? It doesn't go with the rest of my Tarte palettes, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to store. This one isn't a pain in the butt to store, but it doesn't really go here, right? It's like, we wear pink on Wednesdays. You're not wearing pink. You don't go here. This is the Melt Bad Side Zodiac Earth palette. Listen, I really love this palette. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this palette, but if I had to declutter one from Melt, this would be it, because it doesn't go here. So this is another brand that I have palettes that are this size and they go here, and palettes that are this size and they go here, but there's like palettes of 2 different sizes for this brand. One size goes here, one size goes here. This is my Huda Beauty choice. This is the Love Fest palette. And again, this has to do with color story. Like, I just don't love purples and oranges together. I just don't think that this palette is very cohesive. Forgive my nails. Do you see my nails? Like 3 on each hand are missing the nail color because it's starting to peel off. Like, I will never pay the amount of money that I paid for somebody to paint my nails again, considering that it's peeling off a week later. But I digress. This color story is it's just not it for me. I think it goes better together than the blues, greens, and pinks that were in the Norvina palette, but I also did not have a great time with this palette except for in terms of one and done eyeshadow shade. Like, I could put this one and this one together and it was a beautiful look, or this one and this one together and it was a beautiful look. But like, it doesn't make sense to me. That's just, at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to me. So this is the one that I would give up from Huda Beauty. All my other like Obsessions palettes from Huda and all my big, you know, holiday palettes from Huda, I can't see getting rid of. So that was the most logical choice From Too Faced, I only have 4 palettes from Too Faced now, and the only one that really spoke to me when I was looking at them is this one, because it is literally so old. Do I think that I want to get rid of it? No, it still smells like chocolate. It still performs really well. Like, this is back when like Too Faced shimmers were the thing to beat, right? And these are really, really good shimmers that still perform really, really well. But this palette is just, it's just so old. So it really would be the one that would have to go if I was to get rid of one. For Juvia's Place, I did not love this palette. This is Garden of Juvia's, and it is a full-on pastel palette. Now, when I think of a pastel palette that I could get rid of in my collection, this is the first one that comes up, because I'm not a pastel girly. I'm just not. But I did buy this, and then Natasha Denona one, and then I have a Sugar Pill one. This one is the one that I like the least. Now, I do love the shimmers in this palette, but the mattes are very white based. They're very hard to use. And like these two colors here, like, what is the point of those two shades? I just don't think that it's a great palette. I do like the shimmers, but they also just fall all over my face. So I think that the formula in that palette for Juvia's Place is also quite a bit different than the formula in any other Juvia's Place palette. That might be part of the reason. For Odin's Eye, I hate this, that I had to come to you with a palette that I would get rid of from Odin's Eye, because I really truly love Odin's Eye. But if I had to get rid of one, it would be my Angelica Nyquist Little Ghost palette. Mostly because I just didn't have a great time with this palette when I was utilizing it and testing out the two palettes that I have. The one that I had more fun with, which shocked me because I'm actually more of a color girly, was the other one, Trick or Treat palette. This one, there's something about it that I just didn't love working with. There are some really beautiful eye looks that I came out with this, but this was just not a palette that I loved. So of my Odin's Eye palettes, this is probably my least favorite. So that would have to be the one to go. And for Blend Bunny, it would be the Surge palette. I don't want to say that this would be the one to go, because this one was recently discontinued, and I would be sad to have to let something go that is so striking and beautiful and rare now, right? But this also, these neons don't really perform super well. These shades here don't really go with the neons. I didn't really get along with the shimmers that were in this palette. Really great fun with this palette, but not great fun with this palette, if that makes any sense. So this one would be the one from Blend Bunny that goes. For Lime Crime, it would be my Venus 3 palette. This one was a palette that was given to me by my mom. She got it in BoxyCharm, I do believe. And I do like this palette as standalone shades. These shades are beautiful, but this purple is actually a really atrocious purple. It's bad, bad, bad purple. And these three are the only three mattes in here, and I don't think that it is, again, it looks cohesive, but I don't think it's cohesive for like taking out on the town and it being your one and done eyeshadow palette. I didn't love this one, and I have two from Lime Crime that I absolutely adore, so this one just isn't it for me. That one would be the one that would have to go. For Glam Light, it would be the Michaela palette. I have really no qualms with this palette, except for that I feel like of the Glam Light palettes that I have in my collection, this is the least thought about palette. Not that it is a bad palette, because I really enjoy it. I really enjoyed working with it. I really had a great time when I was utilizing it for my palette review series here on my channel, which I will link down in the cards for you guys so that you guys have it. Because I have a review on every single one of these palettes. I just think that when I think of my palettes in my Glam Light collection, this is the one that I think about the least amount of times to pick up and use. I have better blues and purples and greens in my collection, and I don't really think of Glamlight for pulling like some of these more neutral tones. So this one would be the one from Glamlight that went. From Morphe, it would be this one. Again, it is mostly because of color story. This is a giant, mostly pastel eyeshadow palette. And I just did a video, either you have seen it recently or will see it. This is a really great palette. I really, really like it, but the colors that I want to use the most out of this palette, which are these 3 sections here, there's just so few of them. And again, there's a lot of shades in here that I can pull in formulations that I like a whole lot more from this palette. And it is majority, like, you know, 5 rows or 4 rows of shades that I don't really love to pull from, right? So we have a lot of like pastel in here, and I'm just not, again, a pastel girly. So this one would be the one that I would let go of if I was to declutter another one from Morphe. And that's sad for me because there is a Morphe palette that I have in my collection that probably should leave my collection in collaboration with an artist that shall not be named. But I really do like that one for an all-around rainbow palette. And it has a red in it that I specifically love. So the next brand would be from Ace Beauté, and from Ace Beauté I have the Paradise Fallen palette. I just think of the purple palettes that I have in my collection, this one is the one that I like the least. There's not really a light tone purple in here. All of the shades in this palette are very dark and grungy, which I love, but I also want some lightness to it for blending or for whatever reason, inner corner. And the only light shade in here is this silver, and this silver is trash. It is the most horrendous silver. Even this color here, which on screen looks like a lighter pink, is actually really very pigmented, honestly, and kind of dingy, dirty, like taupe, but with like almost a gray flip to it. It's very, very strange. So of the Ace Beauté palettes that I have, this one would be the one that I would declutter. For Anastasia Beverly Hills, the one that I would declutter would be Rose Metals. Now, this again is a palette that is just very, very dark. It does have a little bit of lightness to it with this guy here, but that's it. The rest of it just is very dark. And I think when I did the review on this palette, I said everything that I put on, everything that I created with this palette really looked so metal, industrial, and almost quasi dirty. So I just didn't really love it for my face. Not that it got muddied or anything like that. I just don't think that these are the grandest colors for my skin tone, maybe. There, again, is not a lightness to it that I really want for my palettes. I love that it has like a 50-50 mix of shimmers to, you know, matte ratio. That's fantastic. ABH has always been really good about that, but I don't love that this doesn't have lightness to it in terms of mattes, and only one in terms of shimmers. For Lunar Beauty, this one was hard, but again, this is about how my makeup collection is organized and how this looks organized with its counterparts. And it is the Lunar Beauty Life's a Drag palette. And this one is very sad to me because this is his first. This is how I fell in love with the Lunar Beauty brand. But honestly, these 2 colors down here are kind of quasi poop. These are colors that you can get anywhere. The shimmers are just kind of meh. I mean, they're great shimmers, but they're just basic shimmers also. So in addition to the fact that it is skinny and long, whereas most of his palettes are now, you know, 15 pan palettes, so they're kind of squatty, and this one just isn't. So that would be the one that I got rid of from Lunar Beauty. The one from Urban Decay that I would get rid of is actually in my deck of penning for on the chopping block, and that is Urban Decay Wired. I don't love this palette, and I think it's because I did have and do have Urban Decay Electric, and this one is just a very different bag and a very different formulation from Urban Decay Electric. I love Urban Decay Electric so dang much that it's hard for me to love this one. Now, I do love this white shade here. I think it's beautiful, and I kind of really like this shade here. I think it blends out the like deeper purples really beautifully, but overall, I just think that this is a throwaway palette. So this one would be the one from Urban Decay. This one you probably just saw my palette roulette on, and the next one you will see my palette roulette on soon. But the Rabanne has a beauty brand now, and I picked up 3 quads from this brand, just recently did my review on them, and the one of the 3 that I would declutter if I had to declutter one is this one here, which is the Unnatural World. And the reason why is because this shade here is just, it's gross. It's like a vinyl like cream, but it's not a cream. It's a very weird shade, and it really doesn't lend to the makeup look. And also I just don't feel like this palette goes together very seamlessly. This brown is more orange, and again, we've determined I do not like an orange and purple color story. This is a beautiful taupe, but this color here is just kind of meh. I mean, there's really no color to it. The pigmentation is not great. I don't love the color story, and I hate that vinyl shade. And then the last palette, which is the palette that I am currently utilizing for review, would be my Danessa Myricks collection. I do have 5 palettes in my Danessa Myricks collection right now currently, and the one palette that stands out amongst the rest as one that I would probably declutter is the Groundwork Blooming palette. Now, this isn't a bad palette. It is like this shading that is on my eye look today. I think it is beautiful. I think that it is so pretty, but I also think that it is just a palette that, I don't know, it's like, it doesn't, it's impactful, but it's not as impactful as the other 4 eyeshadow palettes that I have in my Danessa Myricks collection. I love it, but I don't love it as much as I love the other 4 eyeshadow palettes in my Danessa Myricks collection. I think it's weird that the larger of the 2 pans is the cream at the end of the day. Like, why did we make that choice? I don't know. This is just the one of the 5 that I have that I would get rid of. Utilizing this palette has made me want the neutral tone one more, but also less, if that makes any sense. It's not like a bad palette. It's not. It's really not. But I feel like the creams, unless you're using the mattes over the top of the creams, you could see a lot, and you'll get this in my review of this palette, but I feel like the creams, unless you're using the matte on top of the cream, kind of fade away at a rather rapid pace. And therefore, why not just put the powder in the palette? Why not just make an all powder palette of those shades? Because that makes more sense to me. I know the reason why she did it is supposed to be like a full face. You know, you're supposed to be able to use these creams and powders all over your face. I get it. But at the same time, I have a lot of cream in my collection, and I don't typically have to wear like another powder on top of that cream to set it in place so it lasts longer. I mean, it's the one palette from Danessa Myricks that I would gladly hand over if somebody came and said, you have to give me one of each brand from your palette collection. So there's that. All right, so that's it, you guys. That's it. I would love to know your thoughts on my choices. I would also love to know what brands you have more than 3 palettes from in your collection, and which of your palettes would you declutter if somebody made you declutter 1 palette from each one of the brands in your collection that you have more than 3 palettes from. That would be a great conversation to have. So don't forget to hit a girl up again. With that said, thank you guys for joining me today. I hope that you and yours are well. I hope that you are all safe and healthy and getting along as best you can. I hope that you are all loving each other and being kind humans. And until next time, bye friends.